Meet Charles II of Spain. Calling him the product of Habsburg inbreeding is like calling the sun a bit warm. For generations, his family tree had looked less like a tree and more like a telephone pole. The final result was a king who, according to the papal nuncio, was always on the verge of death. He couldn't chew his own food, suffered from constant illnesses, and, most importantly for our story, was completely incapable of producing an heir. All of Europe basically spent 30 years just waiting for this one man to die. As Charles was shuffling off his mortal coil, the most powerful people in the world were essentially leaning over his shoulder, pens at the ready. The two main contenders for his vast empire were the French Bourbons and the Austrian Habsburgs. After intense lobbying and probably some very awkward deathbed conversations, Charles signed a will. It left the entire undivided Spanish Empire to Philip, Duke of Anjou. Who was Philip, Duke of Anjou? Oh, just the grandson of King Louis XIV of France, the most powerful monarch in Europe. No big deal. When Louis XIV heard the news, he famously declared, "Il n'y a plus de Pyrénées." There are no more Pyrenees. This was the 18th century equivalent of a geopolitical mic drop. He was basically announcing a Franco-Spanish superpower. The rest of Europe, particularly the Holy Roman Emperor Leopold I, who was the head of the Habsburg clan, did not take this well. He felt the Spanish inheritance was a family heirloom, not something to be handed over to his biggest rival. And so, the stage was set for a continent-spanning family argument funded by everyone else's taxes and blood. Not everyone was driven by family pride. Over in England and the Dutch Republic, they had a more pragmatic concern. Their entire foreign policy was built around a concept called the balance of power. This just means making sure no single country gets strong enough to boss everyone else around. A combined France and Spain was their absolute worst nightmare. So they formed what they called the Grand Alliance with the Austrians. It was less about friendship and more about a shared panicked realization that they needed to stop Louis XIV from owning basically everything. Luckily for the alliance, they had two of the most brilliant military commanders of the age. From England, there was John Churchill, the first Duke of Marlborough. He was a tactical genius and a master of logistics, which is the deeply unglamorous art of making sure your thousands of soldiers actually have food and bullets. His partner in crime was Prince Eugene of Savoy, a French aristocrat who, after being denied a commission by Louis XIV, decided to spend his entire career fighting France out of pure, glorious spite. For decades, the French army was considered invincible. They had the best training, the best generals, the biggest numbers. Then came the Battle of Blenheim in 1704. Marlborough force-marched his troops over 250 miles in 5 weeks to surprise the French and Bavarian army in Germany. The result was a catastrophe for France. It was their first major battlefield defeat in over 50 years. Suddenly, the Sun King's aura of invincibility was shattered, and everyone realized this war was going to be a long, bloody slog. While Marlborough was winning famous battles in Germany and the Low Countries, a completely different and arguably nastier war was raging in Spain itself. The Spanish people weren't a monolith. The region of Catalonia, for instance, threw its support behind the Habsburg claimant, Archduke Charles. This kicked off a brutal civil war within the larger European conflict. It was a war of sieges, guerrilla attacks, and vicious reprisals. While the great powers were moving armies like chess pieces, actual Spanish towns were being burned to the ground. After Blenheim, the Marlborough-Eugene duo went on a roll. 1706 was their annus mirabilis, or miraculous year. Marlborough smashed the French at the Battle of Ramillies, effectively kicking them out of the Spanish Netherlands. Meanwhile, Eugene broke the French siege of Turin in Italy, saving his cousin and the entire Italian front. It looked like France was on the verge of total collapse. Louis XIV, humbled, was even offering peace terms. But the alliance, drunk on victory, decided to press their advantage. A truly classic blunder. The Allies' decision to push for unconditional surrender led them to the Battle of Malplaquet in 1709. It was, technically, another victory for Marlborough and Eugene, but it was a victory that cost them over 20,000 casualties, nearly double the French losses. It was the single bloodiest day of fighting in the entire 18th century. News of the carnage was met with horror back home. People started asking if winning was worth bankrupting the country and sacrificing an entire generation. The political will for the war began to crumble. Wars aren't just won on the battlefield. Back in Great Britain, the government that had championed the war, the Whigs, was losing popularity. The public was tired of the taxes and the endless casualty lists from battles like Malplaquet. In 1710, they were swept from power by the Tories, who had run on a platform of, "Let's just end this thing already." They promptly recalled Marlborough, accusing him of embezzlement, and opened secret peace negotiations with France. The Grand Alliance was about to be kneecapped by its most powerful member. Just as things were getting messy, history delivered the punchline. In 1711, the Habsburg claimant to the Spanish throne, Archduke Charles, got some unexpected news. His older brother, the Holy Roman Emperor, had died of smallpox. This meant Archduke Charles was now Emperor Charles VI. Suddenly, the entire premise of the war was turned on its head. The alliance had spent a decade fighting to prevent a union of France and Spain, only to now face the prospect of a resurrected Habsburg Empire controlling both Austria and Spain, just like in the good old days of Charles V. The balance of power was now threatened by their own guy. With the original reason for the war now completely irrelevant, everyone scrambled for the negotiating table at Utrecht. The peace talks were a masterpiece of cynical, self-interested diplomacy. The British, having already made their secret deal with France, basically abandoned their allies. Everyone was trying to carve out some territory or commercial advantage from the wreckage. The Catalans, who had fought so hard for the Habsburgs, were completely thrown under the bus. Peace was coming, but it was a peace built on betrayal and exhaustion. The Treaty of Utrecht in 1713 redrew the map of Europe. Philip V, the French candidate, was confirmed as King of Spain, but had to renounce any claim to the French throne. Spain lost big time, ceding Gibraltar and Minorca to Britain and its Italian territories to Austria. The biggest winner was Great Britain. They got key naval bases and the Asiento de Negros, the lucrative and monstrously unethical contract to supply slaves to the Spanish colonies. France was contained, Austria got compensated, and the Dutch got a barrier of forts. Everyone got a parting gift, except for Spain, which was the gift. After more than a decade of war and over 1 million deaths, a Bourbon was on the throne of Spain anyway. The entire conflict was a brutal, expensive lesson in the concept of the balance of power. It ensured that Europe would not be dominated by a single superpower, but by a collection of competing, suspicious, and heavily armed states. This principle would govern international relations for the next 200 years, leading to a whole series of slightly different but equally pointless wars. And it all started because one family was spectacularly bad at genetics. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!